Hello everyone, welcome to SCWIST Broadband. My name is Soheila and I will be the moderator for the event today. We are recording this session, so if you don't want to be part of the recording, please turn off your video. And I would like to acknowledge that SCWIST does its work for Canadian from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Squamish, Tuskegee, and Musqueam nations. For the first time, guest, SCWIST is the Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology, a nonprofit founded in 1981, working towards lowering barriers to the entry and retention of women in STEM fields. We are celebrating our 40th year next year, so come and join us for volunteer and professional development opportunities, including the chance to be a brown bag speaker. Today, our speaker is Analise Hoffman. Analise Hoffman is currently finishing her PhD at UBC with plans to continue in an educator role. Her research areas are cell biology, genetics, high-throughput microscopy with some discipline-based education research experience. She founded Vancouver STEMinist book club in 2019, and she's gonna tell us about that today. So we're gonna have 20-minute presentation and then 20 minutes for Q&A session. Let's welcome Analise with the title of her presentation, One STEMinist Book at a Time, Building a Science Enthusiast Community. Yeah, let's get started.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I have some experience as a teaching assistant at UBC. I taught a course with Vancouver Summer Program in data science, where Soheila was one of our TAs, and I volunteered with Let's Talk Science. I've been with SCWIST, I think, about 6 or 7 years, which is kind of neat. And I would say that I'm a perpetual collaborator, and I like to cross boundaries between disciplines. And this picture is of a still life selfie that I shared with some of my students this year. So during quarantine, I was collecting Lego minifigures of just female science characters, and here are some of the books that I'll talk about. I'll talk about Pursuing Giraffe a little bit later. And I'm born and bred in Vancouver, BC. So yeah. All right. So why did I want to talk to people about science, and specifically with a feminist lens? So way back when I attended, I think, one of my first SCWIST events, I actually won a book called Headstrong by Rachel Swaby. And it has short stories about 40 different female scientists. And I started reading that, and I found it really interesting. One of the people that really sticks with me is Dr. Mary Putnam Jacoby. She was one of the first women to study in Paris to become a medical doctor, and she practiced in New York. And at the time, so late 1800s, male doctors were trying to discredit females in the workplace, in particular in medicine. And they were saying, oh, women get their periods, they're not qualified to work during that time of month. How can they possibly do this? So she took up the challenge, and within 1 year, collected data from a large set of volunteers. And she published a paper that is 250 pages long. And it dictates how women, in fact, are not less capable during their menstruation part of the month. And yes, they can still think clearly, and they can work, and they're physiologically not really too different. So basically, this white doctor made one statement saying he thought that women could not be in the workplace because of their menstruation periods. And she went and took the high road, and yeah, that story just always sticks with me, that it just took that one short statement, and in response she really proved to them that they were wrong. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got started into learning about the history of people that I didn't know before. And then in 2018 there was the scandal about the scientists who selfie. So one student at, I think, the University of Toronto posted an opinion piece onto the Science Journal saying how she didn't like the movement, and she didn't think it was very important or professional for female scientists to to be posting selfies on Instagram. And she just thought it was really taking away from the legitimacy of what they were trying to do and how it wasn't related to the work that they were doing. And it really got me thinking, because I didn't know what to think about that. And I didn't have a problem with scientists who selfie, and the scientists who selfie movement did collect data, and they did show that they are more approachable. People think they're more approachable by seeing their selfies of them maybe just at home or in a cute outfit or whatever they choose to post. So they did collect data eventually to show that showing just everyday photos of people who are scientists is a lot easier for people to engage with and understand that we're just humans like everyone else. And I actually met one of the main people there, or involved in this, Samantha Yamin, or Science Sam, at the Canadian Science Communicators Conference that year in 2018. And it had just broken at the time, so she was being helped by some Canadian science journalists to come up with like a response to this article and things. So it was kind of interesting to be close to that fray and see, like, and I was like, how do I talk to people about this? Who do I talk to about this? Like, I don't know how to process it. And 1 year later, I found on Twitter the STEMinist book club. So they were posting, it came along my feed. They just said like, oh, you can start your own. And I sent a DM, and they're like, yeah, just start your own and go for it. And that's how it started. And it's been going ever since then. Yeah, so I started off of Twitter. Thankfully, SCWIST came on early as a sponsor, and they sponsored snacks when we were meeting in person. And now they have books that are offered as prizes, which is really nice. I started by inviting my friends and my acquaintances and tweeting, and people invited their friends, and people saw it on Twitter or on Eventbrite. And so it just kind of grew naturally like that. And so our first event was in April 2019, and we read the book Broadband. I'll talk about that next. On average, we get about 8 to 12 people who attend, which is really nice. And there's about 60 to 70 people on our mailing list off of Eventbrite. We've discussed 8 books so far. Our 9th one is coming up the beginning of December. And I was really surprised to learn that about 300 people look at the Eventbrite page every event. So that was really cool to see that it's piquing interest. And we've even had 2 guest hosts, Cecilia Sierra, who is an awesome science communicator here in Vancouver, Science Slam winner. She hosted the Lab Girl discussion earlier in the summer. And the lovely Khristine Carino from SCWIST. She hosted our discussion in September with the book Inferior. Yeah, so that's how we're going. We'll have another guest host coming in January as well. But yeah, so it's just kind of organically growing. And yeah, I just try to keep our meetings going pretty consistently every 2 months or so. The group voted they liked Sunday afternoon, so we moved from a weekday to a Sunday afternoon. And we're currently virtual, and yeah, it's going really well. And we're getting people from around the world a little bit now. So from the we've had quite a number from the US. There's a book club in Atlanta as well. And then the original book club is out of Australia. Okay, so the guiding principles that I decided to put in place just for myself and to try to make our book club as inviting and inclusive to everybody as possible is that there's no restriction on who is welcome to join. Anyone from the public is welcome to register. You don't have to read the book. Sometimes we don't have time to read the book, and that is totally okay. And it's still cool if you come and join the discussion or listen to the discussion. Even if you just read a news article about the book or maybe watch a YouTube video, that's great. I try to make sure that the books are available at the Vancouver Public Library and in different types of versions, so ebooks, audiobooks, and usually that also means like softcover versions. I was finding that the original book club kept picking books that were coming out immediately the months that they were reading them or the months before, which meant they were in hardcover. There wasn't enough time for them to get into the public libraries. So I went off of the main book club's book list after our first meeting because of that, and have just been picking a variety of books. Attendance is free. I try to have at least one book that had the movie, so if someone wants to watch a movie instead, that's possible. And then I also realized that a lot of the books are centered around more American stories. So I wanted to make sure, as a Canadian branch of the book club, that we were also bringing light to our own people and Canadian scientists. And then the last one is that I don't always do the same science discipline. So if one month we're reading a book in a biology field, the next month might be chemistry or astronomy. So trying to change that up so we're not always in the same field of science. Alrighty, so our first meeting was in April of 2019, and I think we had about 8 people there. And the book was Broadband by Claire Evans. So this book had just come out earlier in 2019, and the main scientist featured within this book is Dr. Grace Hopper. So she was alive between 1906 and 1991, just to give you an idea of her career. It was around the 1920s to 1991. She was active pretty much her whole career. She was also part of the United States Army. And what stood out to me the most about this book was the fact that Grace Hopper and her many other women colleagues, they were essentially just brought in. They were brilliant mathematicians, and they were brought in to these centers, often in basements of universities. At the time, there was only, I think, 2 supercomputers in the US or so. And they were just hired, they were put down there, and there was no operating manual. So they essentially created the operating manual for these machines, and therefore really had a better understanding of how they worked than their bosses. And the other fun fact was the term computer bug came from Grace Hopper, because she found a moth in the computer at one time. So there's a picture of the first computer bug. She pasted it straight into her lab notebook, and you can see the picture on Wikipedia. So those are the key things from that group. And the first meeting was mostly people that I knew. So it started with the group closer to me. And our next book club meeting was for the book Inferior. So this was written by Angela Sini, and it came out in 2017. It's about how science got women wrong and the new research that's rewriting the story. And this time, Paloma from SCWIST had the great idea of taking a picture, which I always forget. So here's the group of us who were at the discussion, our second discussion. So they were hosted at the University Women's Club, which is a manor up on Granville and 16th in Vancouver, that I'm able to get us space to meet in person. So that's where we will be meeting once we can do that again safely. And here's a picture of the terrace. And this book, the key thing that I could see here is they kind of, Angela goes through the history of how science really was excluding the women's side of things. So they kind of wrote women off as test subjects. Oh, they have hormones, they fluctuate, this is too many unknown variables. So a lot of the science was done just on males. And so a lot of drugs were developed only on males. So they didn't really know the correct dosing for when they wanted to give these pharmaceuticals to women as well. So there was a lot of negative side effects for women. That's probably also partially why it wasn't touched in this book, but I would assume why the thalidomide studies and that big problem happened, because they probably weren't testing in women or in even female mice. So currently there's a much larger emphasis from funding bodies saying that when you do research now, you have to do it on male and female mice, and they're really trying to mandate this in so that these mistakes can't be propagated further. Yeah. And I'm happy to answer any questions about specific books later as well. Our third book was the book Hidden Figures. So it came out in 2016, and I believe the movie came out 2017 or 2018, so shortly thereafter. The main three figures were Dorothy Johnson. So she was the boss of the West Wing computing group, then Katherine Johnson and Mary Jackson. And this book, if you watch the movie is only the last 50 pages of the book. So the book really gives you a much larger description of their lives growing up and how they came to be at the Western Computing Center. Another thing that I really appreciated was that the author, Margot Lee Shetterly, she is an African American, and she actually grew up in the same town where the NASA headquarters were and where these women would have grown up. So she had a very good understanding of the culture that was created in this community where women really were getting educated to high levels and going into the workforce. It came up in Broadband as well. The women were hired as computers. This is where the term comes from, to compute all of the mathematical formulas manually. And the female computers, they cost the companies half as much as the male computers. So that's why women were really being brought into the workforce in high numbers. And these ladies, they were having trouble getting to the higher levels of education. I think Dorothy Johnson, she had to really convince the school that she was at to allow a female into the classroom. And then later on, NASA actually started creating classes for their employees, and that's another way how many of the women were able to get more advanced mathematics degrees because of the efforts of NASA in that area. And then we read another book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. So this is one of the more earlier popular science books about women that I've found so far. This one came out in 2010 by Rebecca Skloot. And she is a white American, and the beginning of the book actually outlines how she was able to garner the trust of the Lacks family, because many people knew that these cells that were collected from Henrietta Lacks while she was sick in the hospital with severe, what's the cancer called? Cervical cancer. Many people knew that these cells had come from her and her family, and they tried to contact them, and they were just trying to get things from them, and they weren't really offering anything in return because the family had already given these cells to the world, and a lot of money had been made off of that. So Rebecca, she went about it in a different way and took a lot more time to get to know them. So that's how she was able to collect this story when others hadn't up till that time. So basically, I said this is a must read for anyone in the life sciences and adjacent disciplines, because this book really chronicles the beginning of medical ethics. So these cells were collected from Henrietta without her consent. They were just brought to a lab, and they were the very first cells that scientists were ever able to keep growing in the lab, to the point where they actually would contaminate everything else. But they really were the fundamental cell line that allowed researchers to figure out what cells need to grow in a lab and really push science research forward in the medical field because of this ability to test drugs and different things on cells in the lab instead of on human beings. So it was a very important contribution from the family, and so it chronicles how things were done at the time and then how medical ethics kind of evolved because of a lot of these problems, this and many other problems that were going on. Yeah. And oh, sorry, I meant to also say there is a movie that I believe Oprah Winfrey produced and stars in, if you'd like to watch that as well. And then we did our first Canadian book, and this book actually came out much earlier than all the other books, back in 2006. And the book we read was called Pursuing Giraffe, a 1950s Adventure. And the reason why it came onto my of how I found out about it is because a documentary was made about Anne Innes and was available on Crave TV. It came out in 2019. And so I watched the video and I learned that she is actually a very prolific writer. So Anne Innes, her mother was a writing instructor, so that's where she got her skills from. But and her father was an instructor at the University of Toronto. And so her family was very academically minded, and she went in that direction as well. And so she always had a diary. And so the 1950s Adventure chronicles her trip to Africa. So she loved giraffes. She wanted to study giraffes. To study giraffes in the wild, she had to go to Africa. So she had to convince someone to allow her to do this. So she was using her initials instead of her full name so that they didn't know her gender. And eventually she found a farmer, I can't remember the country right now, who accepted her, and she managed to go over to Africa and observe the giraffes. And he was fairly well to do, so he gave her a video camera. So there's also footage in her documentary of the first footage for scientific observation that she took of the giraffe. And this book chronicles her trip from Canada over to Britain, and then over to Africa and back again. And it's really well written and detailed, and has a little bit of commentary. Yeah, she also comments on like, oh, why did I think that way back then? Now I think this way. So there's, yeah, it's a really nice book. And she has so many other books. I think you could probably have a full book club just reading Anne's book, because she's written a lot of commentary on women in science, because she was actually, once she came back from here, she was basically discouraged from applying to faculty jobs, or even if she got one, they really didn't support her. So she was completely pushed out of the field. And she only came back into the scientific community because a number of years ago, people were reading her textbook on giraffes because it was the only one. And they were wondering, who is this person? Where are they? Why aren't they part of our giraffe research community? And it's because she'd left completely. So they brought her back into the giraffe research community, and the documentary shows a little bit of that. Yeah, so the other cool fact is she is actually the very first person to go to Africa and do these observational studies. She beat Jane Goodall by like 4 years. So if she had been more well-known, she would have been Jane Goodall, but for giraffes. Yeah. And then here's a picture of the lovely participants for that group discussion. And that's the room in the women's club that we meet at. Yeah. The next book we read was called The Poison Squad, One Chemist's Single-Handed Crusade for Food Safety in the Turn of the 20th Century. And this is by science journalist, her last name's Bloom. I think Rebecca Bloom. And I made a bit of a mistake. I was really excited and thought the main character was a female. And I was really excited because there's also another female author. However, it was about Dr. Harvey Washington Wiley. And why I got really lucky that we still read this book is because he actually later in life married a very prominent suffragist, Anna Kelton Wiley, and all of his efforts to making food more safe in the United States it became law and was made possible because of the efforts of women around him. So including his wife, Anna, and also the National Consumers League of the United States. So at the time, thankfully, Canada had slightly better rules around food safety. Like we didn't allow certain additives, or no, you can't have dust instead of pepper and sell it as pepper. Because Harvey was really showing people like you need to use a magnifying glass, see what's in your food. And then he moved from that, he trained housewives because they're the ones controlling the food in their family and they cared. So they would actually, he trained them how to look at their food and try to determine if it was what it said it was. And he took that, he fought very hard and he had a lot of obstacles, and he took it a step further and he started testing the effects of some of these additives that added like color, or they added longevity to the food. And so he recruited a group of men, and he would feed them the different additives in different amounts over a certain period of time, and then kind of take notes on was there an additive effect of having this ingredient over a certain amount of time, or does it build up in your body? Questions like that. And he was finding very disturbing findings. And so he pushed for legislation that basically established that you can't just add whatever new fancy chemical into the food without testing it. And the National Consumers Leagues are the ones that really help push those forward with the government. And that was a group of, again, women, and they come into play again in the book we're reading right now, Radium Girls, which is a kind of cool thing I'll talk about in a bit. And this was our first virtual meeting. It went really well, so it bode well for continuing with virtual. And then we read Lab Girl, and we had our first guest host, Soheila Zarei. This is actually the first book that I read by audiobook, and it was very interesting, I found, to hear the story read by the author. So Lab Girl was written by Hope Jarn. She's a researcher, and her field spans like I guess it's like chemistry and geochemistry and things around climate change. So she chronicles a little bit of her early life, and then her graduate student experience, and then how she got a faculty job, and then running her lab. And she has her lab manager is a big part of this story because she met him in grad school, and they just were really good coworkers and continued working together, and are still working together. Yeah, so it's a really nice book, just about Hope's life and her experiences as a female researcher. And because it was about, she also has really nice descriptions of trees. Like you learn a lot about trees and you just have to appreciate them. A couple other books came across my Audible recommendation, and one of them was To Speak for the Trees. And I listened to this as well. It's written by Diana Beresford Kroger, and she's actually an Irish Canadian. So we have another Canadian book. And so she chronicles she was lucky to get given a lot of early Celtic knowledge. And she then brought that over to Canada and worked with the Indigenous populations to make sure that certain plants are protected because of their great importance. And she was saying how in Ireland, there was no longer very many trees, and any trees that still existed, they were being very carefully cared for by the people around them. So she really champions for the protection of all these very rare species, and would go around and make sure people realized what they had in their backyards so that maybe they wouldn't just cut it down for the sake of it. So it's another very nice perspective if you want to just continue your appreciation of trees. And Hope also has a second book that came out this year about the story of Moore, where she talks a lot more about climate change. And I would say the two books, their approach to climate change is, Diana has a much more positive approach, that yes, we can tackle it, and Hope is a little bit more negative, I found. Yeah. Then we read the book Superior, where the lovely Khristine Carino co-hosted, and we read this book in September because, as many of you are probably aware, of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'd also been waiting for the book to come on softcover, so like we can't put this book off anymore, and we need to have these discussions now. And I think the main takeaways from this book are that science is not objective, it's political. Race science has never gone away. It's present in places you just might not know they're funding certain things or things like that. So, but what's alarming is that it is creeping back into more mainstream science. So if you think about eugenics, oh, that's a problem of the early 1900s. Well, actually, there's a lot of eugenic principles coming back. And yeah, and another thing that I found really interesting was that just because an ethnic group is more commonly found to have certain diseases like heart disease or diabetes does not mean that the conclusion is this is because of their race and ethnicity and therefore genetics. It's actually, there's a lot more that comes into this. So people are being overdiagnosed or just aren't being treated in the right way because there's all these environmental factors that their socioeconomic surroundings are actually what's causing them to have these diseases in larger quantities. And lastly, we're reading Radium Girls right now. And like I said, it's the same time period as Poison Squad. So we've got the National Consumers League, and it's a great book so far. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but a movie recently came out that you can go watch online. And Vagina Bible is coming up in January. And then, so in summary, I think we need to know the names of many more female scientists because there are many of them. The tokenisms of knowing Marie Curie's name is not enough. And representation matters. So only a fraction of popular science books are written about or by female authors. And I challenge you, if you go to the bookstore and go to the science section, maybe take a count. Every time I go, it takes a really long time to find books written by or about female scientists. And our book club is going to keep meeting virtually for indefinitely, and hopefully we'll have in-person meetings as well. I would love to have more engagement on our LinkedIn platform for people to share different resources and talk. And I would like to make a book list of books about Canadian female scientists for people to reference. And with that, thank you very much. I've gone a bit over time. If you'd like to contact me, I'm on Twitter, Yeast for Sci. The Vancouver STEMinist Book Club is on LinkedIn. You can ask to join and I'll be happy to let you into the group. If you search my name in Eventbrite, all of our events will come up, or you can email us at vancitysteminists@gmail.com. Thank you so much for coming today, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Analise. Please, if you have a question, unmute yourself or write your question in chat box, and Analise is gonna answer your questions.
Okay, I can ask a question. Thank you, Analise. That is amazing that you have just a wonderful initiative. So I was just wondering, are you thinking or have you ever thought extending this group to the elementary school girls or high school girls?
I would love to do that. So I haven't figured out how to do that or how to get them the books, because I think by reading these books instead of just being taught science, you really get to understand the lives of these people. And I think it adds a lot of value to like how you approach science and asking questions. And I would love to do that. I would love to do it.
Yeah, one of the ways to like having a mobile group, like a group visits a school and they read together a book or discuss a book together at a school.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and the other idea is that you can contact schools and have them arrange a group there, and you can guide them or suggest some books, or you can discuss together.
Yeah. Because if there's high school students who want to join our discussion, they're more than welcome. I haven't managed to convince any yet, but they're also welcome to join our discussion. It's probably not necessarily tailored for the younger audience, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed your talk, and I actually got a lot of information about these books in one session.
Yeah, I have on the LinkedIn group a PDF document of like, I don't know, 50 different books. And I probably have another 20 to add to that. So that there are many in this genre. It's just a matter of finding them and finding the ones that interest you.
Okay, thank you.
There's one question in the chat box. What has been your favorite book so far?
For engaging and most engaging, I would put a tie between Hidden Figures and The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Like very enthralling. They just bring you straight into the story. Yeah, it would be a tie between those. But I would say all the ones that we've done so far are good. I would give them a recommend.
Thanks so much, Analise, for your great talk. I wanted to know, what have you found that has been great so far about having these virtual book clubs compared to in person?
One of the cool things was that I was able to invite the Atlanta STEMinist book club to join us. So the founder of that group joined us. And there's been a few other people who have been able to join our discussion and found it on Eventbrite that we never would have met. So when we had our superior discussion, one of the things that stood out to me was one of the participants had attended a different discussion about the book with Harvard professors, and she said that they were really, what did she say? That they were really like, they weren't really discussing the issues. They were kind of trying to, I guess, a little bit deny that these things were happening to a certain degree, which was sounded like a very different type of discussion, whereas we were, I think, more just talking about what was in the book and exploring what we thought about it, and we weren't all defensive. So that was interesting, and I think it saves on everybody's commute time, so it makes it a little bit easier for people to come, and if you can just pop in for a little bit and then continue on. Yeah, so we just get to talk to more people than we would meeting in person.
I want to add to that, with having virtual book club sessions, it just eliminates the need for childcare. I think I always wanted to attend the book clubs, but then I had to bring my kids and the whole thing. So yeah, that's one that I found very useful.
Right. Thanks, Khristine.
But there's another question.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you find that most people who attend the book club sessions are returning members?
Yes. So I have found that everybody who has attended in person, they sign up immediately as soon as the Eventbrite is released. And everybody who has signed up that I don't know personally, they have signed up many more times. So we are seeing not just my friends returning, but also people that have found us through other places they are returning for our discussions. Yeah.
While you're thinking of other questions, I just want to plug this draw. So Analise actually mentioned that SCWIST is sponsoring the STEMinist book club. Last time it was with snacks, but since we can share the snacks or like the dessert, we're gonna raffle off Superior. Okay, and to do that, I'm gonna share my screen. If I didn't kill my Chrome. I placed all your names except Analise and myself. So Nasira, you're also in the raffle. I'll share my screen and we'll have a random draw. Okay. Do I hear some excitement? Okay. Oh, this is the wrong way. Okay, this is, yeah, you see it, right? I wrote your names there. Connie, Soheila, Liliana. I don't know how to pronounce this. Smart J? I've murdered your name?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, perfect. Tasha, Erica, Josie, Krista, Nasira, and Adele. All right, let's do this. Isn't this cool? I only discovered this last time when during Erica's, I think it was Erica's brown bag. Woo! Isn't this cool? There you go, Nasira. It was meant for you. But everybody will have, except Nasir will have a chance to win another book, copy of the book, if you answer the survey, and you're going to receive the link to the survey in an email, maybe at 1 p.m. or so. Okay, so Soheila, I'm giving back the floor to you for other questions, or we can just say goodbye to.
I was going to say, if you email me, I can also lend you many of the books mentioned or other ones that I haven't even read yet. So. You never know. Just email me.
Great. Okay. Again, thank you, Analise, for a great presentation. We really enjoy, and thank you, everyone, for joining the event. And I think we have to finish here. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Bye.